So let us begin with a quick prayer, okay? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, thank you so much for gathering this group together for lunch. I ask that you help us communicate effectively how boundaries can produce great freedom in relationships. Help us be open to communicating with each other, to sharing ideas, and to asking great questions. We ask this in your name, amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. All right, so let's go around the room real quick and introduce ourselves. Maybe your name, year in school. How about that?
Oh, hi, I'm Megan. I'm a junior in community health.
I'm Johnny. I'm a senior in community health. I'm Nissa. I'm a senior in actuarial science.
Father Daniel. I'm a senior in how to be a priest on the job training.
Nice. I'm Andrea. I'm a freshman in speech and hearing science.
I'm Ron Steinberg. I'm a Spanish student.
I'm Francesca. I'm a sophomore in MCB.
I'm Haley. I'm a senior in animal science.
I'm Liam. I'm a junior in accounting.
Very good. Okay, well, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Lucas Sykes. I am the resident director of this building. So, everyone, all that you see here is mine. All right, very good. So I was a student here, and I graduated this past May, and I started working here last summer. And I majored in religious studies and social work. And I would like to introduce to you my girlfriend, Jill Antonini. Round of applause.
Okay, so I'm Jill. I'm a year older than Lucas, so I graduated from here in 2014. I studied MCB when I was here, and I actually went on to, in my master's program in occupational therapy at UIC. So I'm in my last 6 months now, so I'm in my clinicals, and I work a really weird schedule, and I'm off Wednesdays, so I'm here. So yeah, Lucas and I have been dating for almost 4 years. We met on NFK 112 on one of our Koinonia retreats. Highly recommend Koinonia retreats.
Jill was my table leader.
I taught him all he knows.
And then I swooped her off of her feet. She's actually dating someone else at the time, but... Oh well. Well, we know how that relationship worked out. It didn't.
Well, people thought Lucas was a rebound and he wasn't. So anyway.
Don't laugh, Liam.
We like to give people a little something to talk about. Back in 2012. So anyway, so when we started dating, I was a sophomore, Lucas was a freshman at the end of the year. So we lived at Newman, and separate floors, obviously. We lived across campus when I had moved out to an apartment, and then we've actually been long distance for a year and a half since I've been at UIC. And then in the summers, our parents live about an hour away, actually 55.5 miles.
Exact number.
Quickly. So we did sort of distance at that point. So we've been through a lot of different stages.
Yes. So we are here to talk about setting boundaries. So Jill and I were kind of joking that there's a lot of different talks. I'm glad that you're all here. And some of them sound really cool, like love and sex is tonight. And there was body and soul and religious or spiritual, big theological discussion. And so we have the least sexy and exciting sounding talk. Setting boundaries. Yay! On our poster, there's a picture of a fence. Yay! Everyone, stay right here. But we're super excited to talk about it because we are certainly not perfect, and every boundary that we're going to discuss, we have broken in our 4 years. But we also have had a lot of experience and a lot of growth. Specifically with how these boundaries have helped guide our discernment to marriage, which we are still doing right now, and to really help us feel free and to love each other freely in our relationship. So, a couple things about boundaries. So like I said, boundaries at first sound like these fences, like this place that you have to stay inside. So it can sound kind of restricting, but it's actually a kind of a really cool paradox, especially in relationships, that the firmer and more appropriate boundaries that you have between you and your beloved, the more freedom you will have in that relationship to truly love the other. So boundaries, instead of leading to restrictions, ultimately, when practiced appropriately and when practiced well, lead to great freedom in your relationship, and that is certainly what Jill and I have experienced. However, the one caveat to this is that in order for it to lead to freedom, both parties need to be on the same page about the boundaries. So Jill and I both have friends who have made commitments to their significant other, to the person that they're dating, whether they're physical boundaries, social, emotional boundaries, that have been broken. So ultimately it's very difficult, and I would almost argue impossible, to hold a boundary if you're not both on the same page about what that boundary is. So it will lead to great freedom, but both parties, both people have to truly commit to what that boundary is in a relationship. And now we're going to talk about what those boundaries are. So we laid out a bunch of pens, pencils, and little square pieces of paper. I would like to invite you to jot down any questions you have. Jill and I will pause at several points after we hit the key areas to ask for your questions. But if you're more comfortable writing them down and giving them anonymously to us, that's great too. We wanted to ask for any feedback, any questions that you might have. Because Jill and I could talk about this all day, but it's going to be more exciting for us, and I think more fruitful for all of you and for us if we can answer some questions. Not that we are an infinite wealth of setting boundaries knowledge, but we have really great experience, and we're excited to share it with you. Sound good? Okay. So, boundaries. When most people think of boundaries, they first think of physical boundaries, especially in a relationship. So Jill and I practice what the Catholic Church teaches, which is primarily that one's bodies in the sexual union are shared with each other fully in marriage. And so we do not have sex. So it's important. So our physical boundaries are really important to us. And I think the first important thing when establishing physical boundaries is to have really open communication with the other person. Like I said, both people, especially with this one, really have to be on the same page. I have a really good friend who has been a great example in my life, and who has really been there for me spiritually as a great friend. But he has really struggled with this. With his girlfriend, they were both in high school very committed to that boundary of saving sex until marriage. And once they both went to college, he kind of stayed firm in that boundary, but she started wavering. She said, okay, I think we're ready. So that boundary kind of started shaking a little bit, and ultimately it led to them moving forward in their physical relationship. And being there as his friend was really challenging because it was really harmful for him, for their relationship, and their relationship ultimately ended. So that's just another reason why it's so important to be on the same page, and that requires communicating about it. So every single boundary Jill and I have discussed, and at length many different times. So it's really important to be open about having those conversations. So I know that communicating boundaries, especially physical ones, isn't very, for lack of a better word, sexy. That being like, okay, should I kiss you? Should I not kiss you? When would I kiss you? What would it mean if I kissed you? Jill's like, oh, I'm being romanced. So that doesn't sound very sexy or very appealing. But I pose to you, especially yeah, especially for men who I've talked to, that being intentional is very sexy, or being intentional is really a great act of romance, of great love and affection for someone. So establishing those boundaries and being able to communicate and say, okay, well, what would it mean if we shared a kiss? What would it mean if we were to have sex ultimately? And for Jill and I, that would be if and when we are married. So being intentional about that is very sexy, is very important, and can really be an act of romance and great love and affection for the other person. Yep. Okay. So another important thing with physical boundaries, once you kind of have them in place and actually acting upon them, is to really be conscious of your environment, of where you spend time with that person. It's really important. So this is where the term avoiding near occasion of sin comes out, that in order to maintain those boundaries well, sometimes you have to take practical steps, actually setting boundaries like, okay, well, we just got together after being away from each other for several weeks. We're excited to see each other. We need to spend some time talking, spending time with each other, communicating. This is not the best time for us to be alone in my apartment right now. Actually setting up these practicals in near occasion. So it involves primarily knowing yourself very well and knowing your relationship very well. So it's a growing process for sure. And then sometimes you have to, like I said, limit that time that you spend alone. You have to break it up with outings or activities, and Jill will talk a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've been to several different chastity talks over my years, and so I'm always like, what are the practicals? And it can be hard because the church in its wisdom gives us free will, to set our own boundaries, and glorify God with our bodies and things. So I just wanted to touch on a few examples of things that Lucas and I do to help us stay chaste and keep our physical boundaries. So we definitely, when we don't stay overnight in the same place. Like when I come visit, even he has an apartment, so I technically could be on the couch, but it's just too easy to break that boundary. So whenever I'm down here, it ends up being a little bit of a sacrifice because I'm always having to figure out, okay, where am I going to stay now, or is there someone to let me into the house where I'm staying and stuff like that. So I think that's really worth it, and that also goes for when our parents have been gone. And Lucas has been really good about this, where I've been like house sitting with my dog, and I'm there alone. Lucas is like, I'm just going to come during the day. I'm not going to stay overnight. So we've just kind of been a little rigid about that, and I really recommend that. And again, touching on breaking up alone time. I think it can be hard, especially now that we've been long distance. You kind of, or even at the beginning of our relationships when we were a little more that like, I want to see you all the time. You can kind of see like, you're like, well, I just want to spend all my time with this person. And I think what was really important for us is being very intentional with our friendships, setting up times to be social, and just to get out and almost, planning outings, and again, limiting that alone time. And yeah, when I visited for the weekend, I often come down with a plan of like, okay, we're going to have a date night on Friday, and then on Saturday we're going to go see the Morbers, we have it all planned out, in alone time, together time, and so that way expectations are out there, and we can protect each other that way. And a big one that I encountered a lot as a student here was the myth of sharing a bed, because I know my freshman roommate here at Newman, had her boyfriend over, and they shared their twin bed, and it was really comfortable for me. Anyway, but
and probably for them too.
And for them,
they're
as well.
Not that big, right?
Yeah, but I think there's this myth that if you're sharing a bed and you're not doing anything, that it's okay. But I just I challenge you to rethink that, and realize that that's very intimate, even if you're not necessarily engaging in any sexual activities. It's just a very intimate experience to share, waking up next to someone, going to bed next to someone. So I think that's a really good standard to keep yourself to. And then I just want to add, and I think Lucas might even reiterate this later, if you've ever broken boundaries, in past relationships, I had a couple rough past relationships, and it's never too late to redeem yourself and start fresh. I think there tends to be this myth that like if you've already gone there, then you're never going to be able to go back, and that's just not true. And with the grace of God, with the sacraments, I've been able to hold myself to a higher standard in this relationship than I ever had before. So.
Good. Any questions about physical boundaries? General questions for us? Yes, Liam.
As you become a closer couple and dated longer, have the boundaries changed? Or are they pretty much the same as when you first started dating?
Very good question. Very good. I think we meant to talk about this.
Yes.
Okay. Very good, Liam. So, yes, they have changed. Definitely. So, as our relationship has evolved, as we've gotten closer to each other, we've shared more emotionally, spiritually, and it's hard because it's natural to want each other physically, to want to give that gift of self to each other, especially with our bodies. So it is natural and it's very holy. Of course, you have to do something responsible with that, with those things. So we did have, let's just go out on a limb here. So, for example, like making out with each other or something like that. So that was something that maybe, or like sharing a kiss with each other was, not that it meant less, but that it was easier to share a kiss with each other without other temptations at the beginning of our relationship. And that has definitely changed. Now, with our care, with our affection for each other, we've had to be a lot more cognizant of what it would mean to share a kiss. So we've done things like fasting from kissing, not kissing each other at all for long periods of time to protect our chastity. Or saying, okay, well, we're not going to share anything more than like a peck on the lips or something like that. So that's kind of a specific example, but yes. And that's one of the important aspects of communicating boundaries, because people change, relationships change all the time. So, of course, there are certain things that are totally off limits to us, but there's a lot of gray area, which is kind of tricky to work through. And so you really have to be open to communicating and really honestly asking yourself the hard question: are we pushing a boundary that we shouldn't? Are we truly glorifying God with this action in our relationship? That's a really tough question. And we've had to ask ourselves that and then take some boundaries back sometimes. Yeah.
Another boundary that we set as well is not touching under each other's shirts at all. So, like a back rub, like over clothing and stuff. And I think, in the past, I have even been in denial about how physical and how sexual that can get. You don't even believe, you don't even you don't even see it coming, but it definitely is. And I think coming to terms with no, we just can't do that. And that's, again, led to a lot of freedom for us to really use our touch in a way that glorifies God in the state where we are.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny, and it's another paradox of relationships, that sometimes the process is maybe in mainstream dating culture, especially on a college campus, the longer that you've been dating, the more physical that relationship can get. Well, Jill and I have needed to kind of do the opposite, to say, okay, well, we really care about each other emotionally, really want to give ourselves to each other. Let's keep protecting that by making sure we have some good boundaries to have good freedom and love for each other in our relationship.
Yeah, it took us a lot of time to really get in the rhythm of it, but now that we're wiser and
yeah, we
better
actually just figured it out today. So we've been struggling for almost 4 years, but today we were sitting down we nailed it. We've got it now. Yeah, we're set. So no, it's we'll do this until we die. Even in marriage, you're going to constantly be setting great boundaries for each other. That's going to lead to really great sacrificial love and intentionality in your relationship. So setting boundaries is not a game for the dating. It's an important skill to learn. So don't think I'm just going to get married to this person in a year anyways. So What's the
Right.
big deal? Setting boundaries, you'll do that your entire life. Questions about physical? Okay, here we go.
Did you always know each other's intentions, or did you like one time be like, oh, this is really serious, we really need to start talking about this?
Oh.
You're talking physically or in general?
In general.
In general, knowing each other's intentions. I think that's something that Jill and I are actually pretty good at. And we'll talk about this more with the emotional boundaries, but even before we started dating each other, we had a good idea that no, when you start dating someone, you don't betroth yourself into a marriage. But we knew that the point of dating each other would be to have fun, to get to know each other, to grow in friendship, and to ultimately discern marriage with each other. So there was always that intention there that if we're still in that relationship, we're going to be working at it, working to build it up, to move towards something like the sacrament of marriage. Is that kind of...
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's in physical boundaries as well. We actually, in terms of intentionality, we were fortunate. I mean, at Newman, there's just a wealth of great talks to go to together. So we would just go to like talks together, like in groups, talk about NFP, like other like just buzzword Catholic things, and then we'd talk together and reflect on what does this mean to you? Like, what does physical chastity mean to you? What does marriage mean to you? So like, kind of, we had more like general discussions about it, and so that way when it came to us talking about it together, we kind of already knew we were on the same page there. But yeah,
there's times where we weren't sure. And what we had to be willing to do was be open about asking.
right.
Be like, what do you think about this? And that can be really scary and difficult because you might find out, our intentions are not exactly lined up. And sometimes that's been the case. We've had to think about something or realign or rethink our intentions, things like that. Okay,
So,
yes.
when did you guys decide to actually begin to talk about it? When is it too early? When you just start feeling a way towards someone, or
What a good question. Talking about what exactly?
Just
Marriage
setting your
or dating?
boundaries,
Okay.
in the relationship.
Okay. So for example, kissing each other, that's something that we had discussed even before, when our friendship was clearly moving towards a relationship. And not to toot my own horn, but that involved me kind of stepping up and telling her, saying, I have feelings for you, I would like to take you on a date. So there was no let's hang out or let's get coffee at an ambiguous time of the day where our intentions will be totally unclear and it will be really uncomfortable. So we were kind of clear with that, but discussing something like kissing each other, we had dated before actually kind of being in a relationship with each other, and we had said that we certainly weren't going to share a kiss before we were in a relationship. So that was a boundary that we kind of set. But Jill and I were both, and it depends, because that's another difficult thing about this talk, is that it's going to be different for every person. But Jill and I are very open people, so we were very willing to discuss that from the very beginning. And it led to a lot of great fruits in our relationship to really know where each other were at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's never too early though. But again, I think a good way that we started was just starting more general and keeping it light and so what do you think about the Catholic view on whatever? Keeping it more general, and that way it wasn't so kind of too so scary, heavy. Yeah, and then also another thing about physical boundaries, and we've tried to talk about them out of the moment. Obviously you need to be in a private place, but that's another thing. It's just kind of good to talk about those things with a clear head. We've just been okay, let's talk about this tomorrow. Let's go. Okay, let's go to our different dorm rooms, and we'll talk about this tomorrow. You know what I mean? So it's not, it's good sometimes to sleep on it and talk about it when you're fresh.
Yeah. And I will say too, it's important to have those discussions earlier rather than later, and certainly before any actions are taken, whether it's an emotional boundary or a physical boundary. Sometimes you can kid yourself into thinking, I'm not exactly sure where the boundary is, but I know where it will be when I get there. And then all of a sudden you're in the heat of a moment, whether it's physical or even in an emotional argument or discussion with each other, and you're like, where is that boundary now? What can we hold on to in terms of our relationship? So it's important to discuss that before you encounter it. So it depends on kind of the evolution of your relationship. And sometimes you'll find yourself thinking, okay, well, we've kind of gone farther than I would like to, and we're already kind of there and feeling comfortable there. And it's okay, and we've done this too, to say, let's back it up a little bit, or let's talk about this before, we act on anything emotionally, physically, things like that.
And like when you guys like found yourselves like getting close to those boundaries, like how did you like respectfully like tell the other person, wait, hold on, like back up a little?
It's probably exactly what it looks like. Right. Yeah. It's clunky, and it's fun. We could laugh at it mostly. Yeah. That's why it's so important though to have both people on the same page. Because I know like Lucas and I are like laughing, thinking about like if only one of us were really committed to like physical boundaries, there's no way. I mean, we need each other. Yeah. Because it's hard. It's definitely. I think it's just clunky.
So my question would be, what advice do you have for how to strive for that ideal of both being on the same page without falling into the trap of one person dragging the other down to their level?
What do you mean dragging them down?
Like the person who is less committed to, say, a healthy boundary, like dragging down the one who has a higher standard down to pushing a boundary that they're not comfortable with, so that they can be on the same page.
Well, I think the best answer to that is to never go there at the first place. So to have those conversations before you make decisions about physical boundaries. So before you act on them, to have a clear idea between the two people. But the reality is that it's hard sometimes to decide where exactly you are. And sometimes you've already crossed those boundaries together as a couple, that you've made a mistake or you've taken things a little farther than you think is appropriate, and now you have to backtrack, and that can be a lot trickier. So,
I guess what I'm wondering is, at what point is it appropriate to acknowledge, okay, we're not on the same page, but I need, for my own good, to stand up for a boundary that's important to me.
Right.
Yes. Right. So that's a good point. So this talk is kind of centered around growing relationships. So Jill and I are here because we've been dating for a while and we've been growing with each other a lot. But that's a good point that that is not part of our personal experience because we didn't dump each other. But yeah, it is totally appropriate. Just as you find boundaries within two people, to have your own set of very personal and firm boundaries too. You have to realize that Jill and I still consider ourselves single. We've been dating for 4 years, but we're not married. We're not committed to each other like that. Yeah, on our tax forms we're single. So we're single because our taxes decide. But we truly are. So yeah, you also have to, thank you, Father Daniel, to make those boundaries for yourself and say, yeah, I'm willing to work with someone on his weaknesses, on her weaknesses, but also have very firm boundaries for yourself to say, this is a point when, I do need to seriously consider leaving the relationship and saying, this is not good for me personally. Because boundaries are great and it's important to discuss them, but if you can't enforce the boundaries, then they're not very good for you. So that's a great point, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too, but talking to spiritual directors, talking to trusted friends, talking to mentors. If you want to talk to Jill and I about specifics afterwards about your situations or other specific questions, absolutely. Getting really good advice. And sometimes setting boundaries or having the boundaries conversation can be a really good litmus test. if the person that you're dating or with isn't even willing to engage in a conversation about boundaries or open it up for discussion and say, hey, I think we might need to take this back a little bit more. If they're not even open to that, then that's a pretty good sign that they're not open to doing what it takes to allow your relationship to thrive. That they're not willing to do the sacrificial part and understand the needs of the relationship. So, yes.
Have you been able to establish these boundaries, would you say, because you are Catholic? And not just Catholic, but practicing Catholics? Because if you, and that therefore you're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading an article by the late Father Mooney, an almost also, and he said, well, once you're Catholic, you're always Catholic. But some Catholics are very bad Catholics. Or just nominal Catholics. So then, and then I suddenly, yesterday, we made this very point, which I completely forgotten about. What about non-Christians? And this is really disastrous. How would you have any point of relationship setting up boundaries and then they don't even know about Christianity or anything else? That kind of thing. So this, I suddenly realized here, just listening to your very fine remarks here, that shouldn't this be called perhaps a busy Catholic person's retreat to talks, because there's a lot more non-Catholics out there, and perhaps if you're attracted to someone who's not a Catholic and not even a Christian, and then how could you set up boundaries? I mean, we have no point of reference, and so this. And this is beyond your talk, but somebody basically what you said yesterday. Oops, that's you're in a situation that's you're not something to work out from the very beginning. You're going to be chaste, which is the best thing to be. Yeah. And so that's just. Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question. So I think that kind of falls in discussing your own personal boundaries. That personally, for Jill and I, we weren't comfortable getting into a super serious relationship unless a person was committed to their Catholic faith. And that was just important to us. So it's going to be kind of different for each person. But that's important, too, to have a firm boundary for yourself. Because you're right, you can't help your attractions to certain people, to qualities, great characteristics, to the beauty of others. So it's having that boundary there saying, okay, well, this person's not a practicing Catholic. And that's a firm boundary that I made for myself. Or this person's not even a Christian. And I'm super attracted to them, and they're such a great person. And that's another reason to consider your own personal boundaries before you get swept off your feet. So good thing Jill thought about her boundaries before I swept her off her feet. But another point is that sometimes, and Jill and I have heard this too, that will be like, oh my gosh, you're just the most precious Catholic couple, and you met on a retreat, and you're so chaste and holy. And sometimes Jill and I just feel like we wear like a stamp that says sinner on our foreheads. It is, so there's this idea that, as long as you're both Catholic, or as long as you're both, practicing and going to Mass and sitting in the chapel holding hands together,
in the back,
that everything, that everything is going to be just so perfect and holy. And what we discovered is that, Jill and I couldn't have done this without our faith relationships, without our trust in God. But we've also had to work very, very hard. And sometimes it's a little, like Jill said, clunky, making boundaries and super practical things that make you feel like, okay, really? But have given us great freedom. So we know people who have really great relationships who are not Catholic. Right. And we know we have great friends who are in great Catholic relationships who struggle profoundly with some boundaries. Yes?
Kind of going off of that, I feel that you guys both kind of surround yourself with Christians. I mean, you work as like the residential director. I don't know so much for you, but I guess my question is, how do you deal with kind of society's pressure? I'm sure that not all of your friends, and colleagues and family friends are Christian.
Yeah, recently actually I was out to a birthday lunch with my classmates. So at UIC it's very, very diverse. Actually, I think I'm one of two of the only practicing Catholics out of our class of 37. And we were out for sushi on a Friday, and there's a girl next to me. she's Christian, and she's going to be married soon. And she's like, yeah, it's really hard because, like, not having sex, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I'm not either. And, like, the whole table I realized was listening to us. And their eyes just, like, it's like their jaws all hit the ground. And so, it's hard. Sometimes you kind of just have to be a witness. And, just that's, and I think that really helped, surrounding myself with really strong friendships here gave me the confidence I needed to go in this environment where I'm like the only one. I'm like the only one with Ashes on Ash Wednesday. My classmates are all talking about birth control, and I'm like, yeah, my cycle's all regular because I follow you guys. We're on birth control, so thank you. It's funny, and then you can kind of see their eyes, kind of like, oh, because you're right. Because just because we're Catholic doesn't mean that. But I think then they slowly start realizing that standard that I have. But I just think it's having that inner confidence, having that relationship with Christ, surrounding yourself. Like I know my core friends are from here at U of I, and I'm fortunate for that. But I know some people don't have that. So it's just really asking God for strength. So.
Yeah, I think you kind of, in a way, answered your own question too with your original premise. One of the ways that has made it easier or that has helped Jill and I commit to that is by our friendships too. So how can you deal with societal pressures? Surround yourself by good, holy friendships. Christ-centered friendships is really helpful. And there's a lot of ways to do that by getting more involved here at local parishes. And there's other talks this week too about ending or curbing unhealthy friendships too. So it's important, as Jill says, to be a witness, to be confident in what you're doing. And I think the more that Jill and I have seen the goodness and the fruits of our boundaries, the easier it's been to be like, yeah, this is our boundary. And we're proud of it because we've seen the goodness of it. And that was from a lot of experience of dating. But it's important too to surround yourself with good people who share that with you.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, we haven't dumped all of our friends that are in Catholic though, so.
Yeah, no. I have a lot of really great Catholic friends and a lot of really great non-Catholic friends. Mm-hmm. And friends, who are great examples to us even too. We went to a wedding last May of just a phenomenal couple who were somewhat like mentors to us, really great example to us when we're here. So, so Jill and I want to be your example. Be like us. No.
No.
Okay. I don't know how long this is supposed to go. For an hour?
I think
30 minutes? Okay, we went over. Any other questions? Yeah.
Are you guys going to get to like emotional and spiritual boundaries?
Yes, we are. So at this point though, I want to say, so Jill and I are going to be around here till noon or a little after noon. So don't feel like you need to stick around. This is super casual. Anytime you need to get up and leave, that's totally fine. But yes, shall we? Some emotional boundaries. So some points about that is, like I said at the beginning, when you think boundaries, you think a lot of physical ones. But there is a whole world of other boundaries that are really important for a relationship, including emotional ones. So just like, because Jill and I are dating and not married, we don't give ourselves all of our bodies in sex. Just like that, we don't give all of our souls or all of our emotion, all of that to each other either, because that is a gift freely given in marriage too. So that's important to think about too. Sometimes people are like, okay, well, we can share all these emotional things and all these social things with each other, but we'll wait for sex. Well, it's important to have those emotional boundaries too.
Right, and so some things that have been important for Lucas and I is, I'm thinking about, especially towards the beginning of our relationship, that he's not my only emotional outlet. Even yesterday, so I'm getting over a sickness, and I was feeling sorry for myself because I had to miss work yesterday. And I was texting Katie Brock, actually, like my really good friend from here, and I was like pouring out my heart to her, and I was like, I felt really good after, and I was like, I'm so glad I didn't dump that all on Lucas. And so that continues to be a priority of mine, even, years into our relationship, because I'm very emotional. So it's good for me to, talk to my mom, talk to my siblings, So try to, make sure that you're not using them as your only emotional outlet.
Yeah, so at the beginning of our relationship, we were definitely not each other's biggest emotional outlet. But after a year and a half, couple years of dating, we certainly are now each other's biggest emotional outlets. And that's natural and that's normal, and it's progressed naturally through our relationship. But even still, like we said before, we're still single. So we need to make sure that we're not completely dumping everything out, and we're not using the other great outlets that we have, our friends, our spiritual directors, priests, sisters, our parents, truly being open to having other conversations and sharing crosses, joys with other people as well. So why is that important? Anybody? Okay. Anytime I ask a question, it's pretty safe that you just respond, freedom. And you can shout it too.
Freedom.
I was not shouting. Freedom! Everyone together.
Freedom.
Okay, for freedom. So with that emotional boundary too, by making sure that we're not completely each other's sole and only emotional outlet, we give each other the freedom to truly and fully discern marriage. If we were each other's only emotional outlet, it would be really hard for me to break up with Jill if I really needed to break up with Jill. If I was called to a different vocation, if some of the aspects of our relationship were unhealthy, if she kept crossing my personal boundaries. If you're asking yourself the question, okay, maybe I need to break up with this person, but if I break up with them, who will he have? Who will he have to talk to? Who will he have in his life to deal with A, B, or C? That's probably a sign that both parties need to work on establishing good, healthy, emotional outlets, both with each other and with other people. Does that make sense?
And I also wanted to touch on discussing marriage. So I don't have a Pinterest board or anything. I know Pinterest is kind of out of style, but I think it's really important, especially as a woman, for me not to think too much. Even earlier on in a relationship, just not to think too much about marriage. You kind of have to balance. It's like, when is it appropriate to talk about marriage? I think Lucas and I had our first real talk a year and a half ago after I graduated from here. We kind of were after big life transitions, making sure we were on board before we embarked on a long distance relationship. So it's been a natural progression, but we've had to put stops on things sometimes because we get a little excited. But yeah, I think just dating is supposed to be fun. Lucas and I try to remind each other of that. Keeping things light. I mean, it's a little different now, to be honest. Now we're actually talking about marriage. But yeah, the previous 4 years, it's been very important for us. To kind of put the brakes on that and just try to keep things lighthearted. So yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky one. We're not sure how to exactly present it, because with some people we would say, whoa, put the brakes on, stay present, enjoy this part of your dating relationship, be present with each other, discern well, no need to jump the gun. And with other people, we'd be like, what are you doing? Are you wasting each other's time? Are you not being intentional? Why are you not discussing even the possibility of marriage? So both kind of extremes, and we've both experienced that with different friendships. So that's a personal thing too. You want to make sure that you're not avoiding the conversation for any particular reason, but you also want to make sure that you're giving each other the space and the freedom to date, to be a dating couple. Cool. Use the date word. Liam, when you ask a girl out on a date, use the date word.
Always.
Okay, great.
None of this hang out business.
Don't say hang out.
Yeah, never hang out.
Never hang out.
They won't even know and say yes.
Get ice cream?
Yes.
No.
If you are questioning whether or not you're going out on a date, oh my gosh, the number of times where I've heard friends be like, I'm not even sure if it's a date. How do you not know if it's a date? Well, I don't know if he's going to buy my food. Do I put my purse out on the table? Do I don't know, use a date word. Okay, great.
Okay.
Social boundaries. It's important too with social boundaries. So with social boundaries, we're talking about your identity as a couple with other people too. So you have to determine boundaries between each other, and you also have to have boundaries and expectations for your identity as a couple with other people, with friendships, with parents, with strangers, with anyone. Yeah.
So I think it's really important to give yourself the space to pursue other friendships. I have some friends that really got so wrapped up in their relationships that they really didn't make any other friends. In fact, that was me. My freshman year, the first guy I dated, I kind of allowed myself to get really wrapped up into him. And I got back to school my sophomore year, and I was like, I have no friends. Like, I just have no friends. Like I didn't have a lot of, not like no friends, but I just didn't have any close friends. And, that was really hard because I really had put so much time and energy in, like, this obsessive kind of relationship. So I think it's really important, and that's something that with Lucas, I really consider one of my greatest successes in college is that I left with really strong friendships that I still have now because we...
And a really strong boyfriend.
And strong. Because we gave each other the space to pursue friendships. That included when I lived in an apartment, like Lucas didn't stay over because then that was a really special time I could have with my girlfriends, and we just had an awesome reunion. So that's like so important, so that they really got to know me, and I got to know them as an individual and just be a girlfriend to them, and then be his girlfriend as well. And we did things together, but it's just kind of checking all those boxes off.
Yeah. So that's another balancing one. To some people, we would say, oh, you really should give each other more space to really invest in your own friendships personally. And other people would say, yeah, it's appropriate and you should try to engage each other, because one of the awesome parts about relationships is bringing each other into each other's lives in deeper ways. And sometimes that means bringing Jill to, when I was in undergrad, to marching Illini parties, because I was in the marching band,
that was fun.
And introducing each other to different aspects of our lives too. So another important part about social boundaries is managing friendships that people have with the opposite sex. So Jill and I have a lot of friends too who have struggled in their relationships because of one or the other's closeness with a member of the opposite sex. So for example, at this point, it would not be, I'm not going to say it would be inappropriate, but it would not be appropriate for me to spend a lot of alone time, a lot of one-on-one time in private places with another woman who's not Jill. Not out of like temptation or, oh my gosh, what would happen? Or, oh, people will think this or that. But out of respect that I have for Jill, especially because we're long distance right now, and out of my respect and love for her, it's important that I keep those boundaries clear with other people, because I have a lot of really good friends who are great women who I do spend time with, but making sure that out of great respect for Jill, that I maintain those boundaries with other women, and the same for Jill.
Mm-hmm. And that was the clunky part of our relationship as well, on both sides. So it's interesting just to kind of talk about it in blanket statements and realize that arguments and rough patches with a lot of these things. Anyway, doing well now. The other thing I wanted to touch on with social boundaries is, maintaining the privacy of your relationship. It's not, for me, especially like say people who are already married, something really like a pet peeve of mine is like when a wife will go off about her husband and talk bad about him when he's not there. And so I think like bringing that into our relationship, I really think about how can I protect Lucas when I'm talking about him with my friends. So when I keep pointing here because I live down the block that way. But with my girlfriends, we were all in committed relationships, and so it was great because we were able to talk to each other. But it was just really important to maintain our privacy as well and not tell them too much.
So the last little chunk is specific communication boundaries. So like I was saying with Liam, it's important to discuss your boundaries and keep discussing your boundaries because they can change over the growth of a relationship. And it's natural that they will change. And Jill will talk about some of our changes too.
Yeah, so the beginning of the relationship, this is a real issue for me because I wanted to text all the time. Lucas is not a texter. So
like my thumbs won't do it. They cramp. I don't like it. Emojis, boo.
But you've been a lot more emoji these days.
That's true.
So anyway,
Okay,
but yeah.
the emojis are really exciting now.
So then that was like another conversation we had to talk about. It's like, well, and then, I'm sorry, I don't want to embarrass you, but, like Lucas would be, like, it's hard with social media because, like, we can monitor each other so much. So, I'd be, like, waiting on a really important text for Lucas, and he'd, like, post a Facebook status.
Really important. Kidding, love you.
And so I'd have to be like, Lucas, like, come on, like, at least respond to my text before you, like...
It's true, that was not respectful.
But yeah, it goes the other way, too, because I can't be crazy. And I've come a long way with that. It's just, I don't... It's okay.
You liked something on Facebook and you haven't texted me back.
Like, you have to, like, you open my Snapchat. Been there.
Yeah.
Recently. So anyway, so it's just, like, learning where the... try not to be like a crazy female a little bit. And then also, attending U of I together was hard because we could see each other every day if we wanted. We had a meal plan and we could like be together all day. And Lucas was he was the one that really made me rock with that because I always wanted to spend more time with him. So he actually kind of got us into a habit of just setting a week at a glance. Like, when am I going to see you? When am I not going to see you? So we always had like a standing lunch date like on Wednesdays. And we saw maybe each other like 2 evenings between Monday and Thursday, but we just really try not to see each other all the time. Maybe like give each other space to be students. So a lot of couples study together. Like, we really didn't do a lot of that. That was just our style. Yeah. But then again,
I could never study together.
We just couldn't. But it was great because studying is such a big part of being a college student. I did that with my girlfriends. So that was kind of nice. So I wasn't just constantly with him. But yeah, again, so it's kind of setting like a week at a glance really helps with that. And then now, as a long distance couple, we have nightly phone calls for half an hour. And actually, we're pretty consistent about the half hour thing, which is so that's kind of like a standing expectation. And if something changes or Mondays get rough or something, we talk ahead about that. So it's kind of what communication looks like for us.
Another important thing that we wanted to share is that with communicating, it's important to us that there are no, that there are no taboo subjects. So there are no topics that are off limits for Jill and I. And that's just been really important to us. That's kind of how I was raised by my parents and my family, that there is no subject that is off limits, especially if we are growing towards discerning marriage. That there's never something that we need to feel that we need to hold back on. That being said, of course, there are important private boundaries. So if I were to ask a question or have something to say or a comment to bring up, it's totally appropriate to say, you know what, I can't have this conversation now. I'm not emotionally up for it, or I'm tired. It's okay to say, I don't even know how to respond to that right now, or I'm not comfortable having this conversation. But being able to communicate when you need to, really appreciating each other's needs in communication, and being willing to say too when you need a boundary yourself, to say, okay, I'm really tired. We cannot have this talk right now. Or I don't really even know how to begin with this. Let's take a day to get our feet on the ground, to take a deep breath, to let emotions calm down before we dive into this again. And that's really important as well. Okay, well, that was the end of our formal points. We also want to remind you that it's never too late to establish boundaries. You're probably thinking right now, whether you're in a relationship or not, times where you've broken boundaries, times that you wish you had set up different boundaries, and that's really great. we want to encourage that. Even Jill and I had a great time planning for this because we were evaluating, again, our boundaries as we have done often in our relationship. So it's really healthy. It's a great thing to do. It's never too late to pull back boundaries, to establish new ones. And sometimes it even livens up a relationship and refreshes it too, which is really cool. And then if you're struggling with boundaries or you need further help, we recommend praying. Visiting the sacraments, frequenting the sacraments is huge. Jill and I have been to confession many times. We've been to Mass together and received the Eucharist many times. It's been so critical. I cannot say that enough for our relationship. Trusted spiritual directors like Father Daniel, priests, sisters, other lay spiritual directors, trusted friends who share your values and goals, mentors like Jill and I are great mentors now, and then other great resources like talks, speakers. We recommend Jason and Kristalina Everett, if you've heard of them. Google search. They do great work.
And their Facebook page is really good too.
Yeah, and they're really inspiring couple who talk about this way better than Jill and I. So yeah, those are some resources. So it is just about noon right now. Thanks for sticking around for the whole talk. We'll be bopping around a little bit. Feel free to come up, ask us some specific questions.
Anyone wants to talk more in depth about something, I'm willing to open up more about personal things, past, all that stuff. If you want to just run anything by me.
All right. How about you guys applaud me? Thank you.